Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Today we are discussing what did we get from Beyond Order. And so we're going to start with a presentation by Victor, recapping all the 12 rules as a refresher. And then anybody who wants can talk about what they got from this book. So Victor, floor is yours.
Oh, thanks, Shrikant. Hello, everyone. We had a wonderful series and we discussed all 12 rules from Peterson's new book, Beyond Order. And this is more of a refresher to go, idea is to go through all the rules. So the first rule is do not carelessly denigrate any social institutions or any creative achievement. He tells us social institutions actually are important, and they developed over years and they have their own validity, like educational institutions, financial institutions, healthcare, and any kind of social institutions. And even personally, marriage, if you take marriage as an institution, it has its own value. And so all institutions, they carry their meaning, but at the same time, they are insufficient. And the balance is to learn all the rules, learn all the ways, and be a shining exemplar. And only then, when you start not seeing the meaning, then you can go break the rules. And the idea is to transform yourself, and only then you can go transform outside of yourself. Second one is imagine who you could be and then aim single-mindedly at that. For that, we discussed this ancient painting or the artwork. Essentially, we discussed who are you, who you could be, and how to act. It's a point A to point B going scenario here. So where you are right now is who you are, where you are and where you want to be. And that's the journey and how to act towards that new goal. And that's the story of everyone's life. And that's the eternal story. And going into that, we saw all the elements that we can find. And we discussed how everything is within us and we're outside of us. And everyone is in their own story. And the idea is take up something that you find profound and noble, which is not a good, which is not perfect, and make it perfect. Notice errors while you are on the journey and go ahead, because you yourself are a journey, and you better have a better map. That's the second one. Third one is do not hide unwanted things in the fog. While discussing this one, we discussed two main things: sin of commission and sin of omission. The sin of commission is doing something actively wrong, actively bad. And Peterson focuses more on the idea of sin of omission. That is willful blindness. We not doing something and regretting that we didn't do in our own future. And there are reasons, he gives a set of reasons why we are afraid to take any action for that. Maybe we are afraid of ourselves, our past, our new knowledge that tells us, okay, this cannot be done, or our own rationalization, or even the hopelessness that even if we try, it wouldn't happen. And one of the main reasons that Peterson says is everyone wants to do something, but at the same time, any want, any desire actually has two ways to go: success and failure. And success, or the want itself, acts as a judge. And if we succeed, it's fine. But if we fail, what we think is we actually failed. So we put all the blame on ourselves, and that actually hurts. That is one of the reasons that we don't take steps ahead. and eventually we will feel the resentment. So that's the idea behind do not hide anything in the fog. Fourth one, notice the opportunity lurks where responsibility has been abdicated. For this, he mentions 4 good points. That is, picking up responsibility is a good thing. It's nothing that is worthy has been done easily. Everything that is worthy has taken a lot of time and effort and a lot of trials. And most of the times we struggle with the idea of limitations, that we are limited into this particular situation, this particular financial or personal or social situation. But limitations actually help our game to work. It actually sets a vantage point, where to start and where to go. And assume that taking all the responsibility and playing the game properly will actually help us and we'll have to go ahead. Fifth one is do not do things that you hate. Peterson went into some current issues, but we can also look at this rule in a very personal way, meaning do not do things that you would hate yourself in the future. And for this, we discussed this particular story where John stupidly buys a rock and thinks that it's a jewel, and at the end he finds that it's not a jewel and it's a rock, and he suffers for it. So that's a great cautionary tale for us to not to do things that we hate ourselves in the future. Abandon ideology. That's the fifth one. A couple of good points about ideologies is ideologies are captivating and enticing, and most of the times they are self-serving, and they divide people or ideas into, oh, we are doing good and the other guys are doing bad. And usually anyone who cannot think critically about the ideas, both sides, they can fall into any one set of ideologies. And we discussed a particular story from Nietzsche that's about how he claims God is dead. And he says, yeah, God is dead. It relates to ideology. The idea of God and ideology relates in that story, because since we killed the notion of God, now we are running around ideologies. Any kind of ism can fall into ideology. That's about ideology. And the seventh one, work as hard as you possibly can and see what happens. For this, Peterson mentions about this coal in a perfect form is a diamond. And there's an old saying, a diamond is a chunk of coal that did well under pressure. And for this, we looked into a particular story from Maps of Meaning book. That's Nietzsche, who goes into a new town, takes the responsibility, looks at a particular problem that they have, gives everything that he has, and comes out successful. And discussing this particular rule, he talks about dogma versus spirit, prohibition versus exhortation, the notion of thou shalt not versus thou shalt. Meaning, so prohibition is more of not to do stuff, and exhortation is we actively going ahead and taking some responsibility and doing it. Eighth one is try to make one room in your house as beautiful as possible. Discussing this particular rule, he actually pays more attention to the idea of beauty and imagination in a particular person's life. The idea is not just cleaning a particular room, it is to make any room as beautiful as possible. Why beauty? Why aesthetics? Why aesthetics in our life? And for that, he mentions adults, we experience things with closed eyes when we see a table or a car or a new phone or a new anything. We just look at it, we get the concept, and we just move on. But artists, they have a childlike curiosity, and they are the ones who bring they can look at things in new ways, and that's how they bring new things into life. Artists like paintings, or musicians, dancers, sculptors, any kind of visual arts, literature and poetry, they see the things more in a fresh manner, and then they bring new things into life. So we need that kind of artistic look into anything that brings out the artist in us. And beauty actually reminds hope, and it makes us immune to cynicism. So art in a home, like a painting or a sculpture, it actually helps us ponder on the transcendent, because art is the medium between the abstract and the very real thing. That's the reason he says, make a room in your house as beautiful as possible. Ninth one, if old memories still make you cry, write them down carefully and completely. This is to face whatever that you are struggling with. The lessons here are: do not repeat the mistakes, do not fall twice into the same pit, learn from the past, keep doing new things, that is being, make a choice to move forward and move forward. 10th one, plan and work diligently to maintain the romance in your relationship. And for this, we focused on the idea of candle in a wedding, this particular tradition that we see in the West, to light a candle in so the newlywed couple, they go and light a candle, and at the same time they have vows. What's the meaning behind it? Any particular relationship can fail if anyone becomes more tyrannical, or if anyone becomes more fall into a particular kind of slavery. The idea is not to serve each other, but to serve something better than them, and that is the institution of marriage. 11th one, do not allow yourself to become resentful, deceitful, or arrogant. And for this, we looked into the story of Maleficent, and the notion of willful blindness by her father actually creates the problem, and yeah, at the end it resolves it. The story resolves, but willful blindness can make us resentful, deceitful, or arrogant. The last one, be grateful in spite of your suffering. And for this, there is a case for bitterness in anyone's life. There are two, if we divide people on the basis of belief, there are theists and atheists. Theists don't believe in God, atheists don't believe in God. For a particular case is God is omnipotent. Well, let's say if God is omnipotent, and if he's perfectly good, if he doesn't allow any bad to exist, then we see a lot of bad in the world, and that's the reason I don't think there is God. So that's a very valid way to present the case. And the theist, the dilemma of a theist is, of course, well, we can say, okay, God exists, but we see all kinds of problems in the world, and dying children. How would you justify such kind of thing? So both arguments don't give a good answer for suffering. And for that, Peterson gives a particular experience from his life where a woman who had all kinds of problems, her health problems, mental problems, and abusive boyfriend, and an aunt that she has to serve at home who is really ill. She has all kinds of problems, but she came to the hospital, the clinic, and she offered help that if she could do something for any other person. So that Peterson says that actually made an impression on him. So he gave that idea, that story, to tell how courage and love are important. And he says, rightly or wrongly, she is the symbol of human suffering. She was sorely afflicted, yet she was capable of courage and love. That's be grateful in spite of your suffering. So those are 12 rules. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Victor. Actually, Shrikant just stepped out to take a call. So we will just be transitioning now to takeaways from 12 Rules for Life. So if you could type exclamation point in the chat and share your takeaways from 12 rules, not 12 rules for life, beyond order, 12 more rules for life, then it would be great. And feel free to get us started, anybody. Claire, thanks.
Yeah, of course. So a couple things. First of all, Victor, that was awesome. Thanks for just refreshing my memory to a lot of the things we've shared together here. I think that the thing, and I've already told the small group before this, is I'm just trying to clamor together my understanding of how does this all fit together and how does it mean chaos. And I think that, everything about this book, from its black color to the chapters that are chosen, are kind of wound up in these ideas of the feminine, of chaos, of the dragons, of sort of aestheticism and the visual cortex of relationships, even as we see in chapter 10. And so I'm just kind of, what I'm left with was, okay, what is that central thesis that I want to walk away from? I think in the first book, it was very clearly kind of like, get your life together and accountability and individual pursuits. But there's a lot of kind of bangers of chapters that just hit really hard in their own way. And so that's something I'm hoping to get out of this conversation today, is just how do we pull this all together and kind of make something for ourselves. So I'll just kind of start with that.
Thanks, Claire. And we have Brian next.
So since I retired in 2015, I've been reading a lot of philosophy and history and other things, and doing YouTubes and a few of these meetups. The thing that strikes me about Jordan Peterson and all of that is that I think he really wants to be helpful to other people in terms of his learning. He tries to come up with takeaways or applications that will really help other people. And in a lot of my other readings, they're all very interesting, and but sometimes they're not really trying to, they might be helpful incidentally, but they're not trying to be helpful intentionally. And some intend to be helpful and aren't quite as engaging or helpful as Jordan Peterson is. So that's what just one of the very, to me, inspired. Before getting into any kind of detail, that's just the spirit I think that he's brought to these endeavors. In some ways, obviously it's fallen short, but I think that that's the attempt I think he's making.
Thank you. So does anybody else wish to share their takeaways? Victor.
Well,
And Maritza after that. Thank you.
So I actually liked a few rules, especially the last one, the notion of being grateful in spite of our suffering. That's a new one, and it in a way relates to chaos, because no matter if we are no matter we are suffering now. In one of his videos, he said this nonchalantly that even if you're not suffering now, you would suffer later. So that, and yeah, if suffering is coming anyways, it's better to have a particular take on it and then face it. So in that regard, I think that last rule, that last advice, that actually stuck with me.
Thank you, Victor, and thank you for your presentations. They really have added quite a bit to every single one of these meetups and given us a great deal of context. So we have Maritza next, followed by Paul.
For me, I found this writing of Peterson's to be a little lighter than some of his other works. Some of the others I felt delved into a little bit deeper, all the issues that are near and dear to Peterson. Although it could be that because he did repeat so many of the stories from his previous works, that maybe for me, this didn't feel as heavy. So if I take a step back and I try to consider the book from the perspective of somebody who hasn't read anything else of Peterson's, then I can see the benefit and the value that they may have gotten from this book. The chapter that was most intriguing to me would be, that's not where we're at. Are we supposed to be answering that? What's the question?
No, feel free. No, go ahead.
Number 11, the one admonishing us not to allow ourselves to become resentful, deceitful, or arrogant. Now that's not really, it's not a new concept, right? I mean, it's kind of almost one of the most obvious statements that is so difficult to follow. But of all the chapters, the one for which I felt the need to write down the most quotes. And I think it's always good to be reminded of this. I mean, we're human and we tend to take the wrong fork in the road perpetually, right? And something that is, I find to be consistent with Peterson throughout all of the things, all of the videos I've seen, discussions and books of his that I've read, is this concept that, the goal, the diamond, that light that we're headed towards, or that we want to head towards, or we should want to head towards, it's that meaningfulness, right? We are seeking a meaningful path. And that's without consideration for what you think is at the beginning or the end of that path, right? That's the, we want to move forward with meaning, with purpose. And this concept of not allowing oneself to become resentful, deceitful, or even arrogant it's almost a duh kind of thing, but then it's not, because if you take a minute, it's so easy to fall into any of these without entirely realizing that we're falling into it. So then this is a reminder of the very much required aspect of ourselves for iteration, as it were. So just because today we find a nugget that leads us to believe we are certainly walking that meaningful path, there's no guarantee that by the end of today or tomorrow or the next minute, we won't have strayed and we're now walking either backwards or the wrong way. And this, if we take the moment to ask ourselves if we are ensuring that we're not allowing these patterns to derail us, then that aids us along our path, right? Because Peterson, some of the quotes from this chapter, he says, the fact that unfortunate things are happening or are going to happen to you is built into the structure of reality itself. And I mean, that's actually like huge. I mean, again, it's probably a little bit of a duh moment. But it's like, sure, but it's so meaningful that it does demand that we be aware of that. And what I hear Peterson telling us is that we have to do self-checks perpetually in order to not fall into all the traps of life and the noise that comes from trying to live it. So that's all I want to say for now. Thank you.
So thank you for those, those takeaways. I found Rule 11 to be, specifically resentment, to be the most impactful, that section in the book as well. So I had that a similar reaction as to you, as you did. We have Paul, then Laura.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Thanks, everyone. What a great series. What I respect from this whole effort of his is that he followed his own rules. What I mean by that is, when you see a book by a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a person from the mental health field, and I have a degree in that area, so I look at these books and I notice people take a slant. They pick a discipline. They talk about cognitive distortions in their book and run with that, or they use a dialectical behavioral therapy or a mindfulness thing. But what I'm getting at is Jordan Peterson didn't do that. It's almost like, as Maritza said, it's not as deep, but it's almost like folksy, like, do not be resentful, deceitful, or arrogant. It's so not psycho speak. And he's not afraid to do that. Just break all the mold and look at what's most useful. Don't get sucked into an ideology. I feel like he followed his own rules to come up with these rules. And he's inviting us to do the same thing with these rules. Hey, I accept this as a powerful thing. I won't denigrate it, but I'm going to build my own system. I'm going to take what I need and leave the rest. I'm going to think of a new rule that more applies to me in relationship. He's like inviting us to do all that. So I admire his just complete courage. He broke all the molds himself. He wasn't afraid to sound folksy. He put out what he thinks is the most important stuff. And I thank him for it and all of you.
Wow, that's amazing. That's awesome takeaway. Yeah, I mean, I agree. He puts his heart into his work, and it really does show. And I think he has a unique way of communicating, and in a folksy way, but also in a very deep way. So I think that this is, it's a great takeaway. Laura, then Jonathan.
Yeah, I guess my feeling was when he sort of wrote about his illness, was very incredible, that he really put himself out there and talked about it, from his perspective. I mean, he really took his insights and brought them out. And I thought it was kind of remarkable how he presented that time and, how he got through it and how he still struggled with it after.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that is one of the unique things about this book, is that he was going through his own troubles while writing it. So when we're looking at it, he was actually, as Paul said, he was living it.
Yeah,
so I think that was one of the more interesting parts of, and we'll discuss this at some other point, but people's takeaway as to what they think about that as well, and how that may have impacted the book. We have, we have Jonathan, then Claire, then Dee.
Yeah, this book, it's kind of interesting. Well, one is based in the context in which it was written, both societally and in this person's life. And I can't help but think that having gone through the book, wondering, and knowing sort of how much sort of health issues she was having, if the book would have been, better written, if he had not been in such, straits. But even still, like, the ideas are there, right? So, and that's the important thing. And one of the main takeaways for me of this book is basically how, I would say, like, unoriginal the ideas are, and that it's not a bad thing. Like, basically every idea I've either heard him talk about or I've heard somewhere else. And so there's no, this isn't Nietzsche predicting sort of, totalitarianism in the 20th century, like 100 years before it happened. This is basically like a field guide. And
Genius in it.
And basically, I think, like, these sort of ideas, these sort of need to be rehashed. Like, we need to sort of retell them and to apply them. Like frameworks, you sort of can have, like, don't steal. It's easy to say, but you need to make that part of you need to apply that, or more complex things like democracy. Democracy is good. You need to know what that means and embody it, or, being authentic. These are things that are very easy to say, but if you don't sort of make your own rules out of them. And so what I see him doing is this book is basically him articulating these rules and taking some of his ideas, mixing them with other ideas, and then retelling them and trying to live them. And I think that's why it resonates. I think there's something about making ideas your own that gives them new life. And so that's my main takeaway. And one final thing, I guess the last time, like, I asked a question and I wasn't sure what type of response I would get, which was like, think of something to be grateful for right now. And one thing I noticed, which I was really pleasantly surprised with, was how the room sort of brightened up. I don't know if anybody else noticed that, but, like, I just noticed people started saying things that they were grateful for. And as it got through, I felt like, I don't know, just in a better mood. And that just reminded me of, like, how powerful gratitude is. Like, not in a way that, like, oh, you should be grateful because you're, a rich Westerner, but just that for self-care, like, there's a lot to be thankful for, and you can draw on that, and actually it can help change your perspective. We sort of have this myopia. I think it's part of a symptom of the modern world. And so that chapter really was my favorite chapter. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Oh, that's great takeaways there. So thanks. And then Claire, then Dee.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I think last week there was a certain lightness in the room, and you just see the practice of gratitude just, like, light people up. As I'm listening to all you guys and just reflecting on this, I'm thinking about kind of like what I expected of this book. And I think we were all really hopped up. And I think what I expected was, like, the New Testament to the Old Testament, like the power up, the new level, that we would be able to see this from this, like, higher vision perspective that was so different than what we already knew. And I think what you see in this book is it's really just a continuation of those rules. Like, maybe you could see them in contrast to each other, but I think it's just a longer list of them. And maybe what it is in light of the experience that he went through and the world went through is, hey, this stuff stands up when things get really, really hard. And that's it. It's not that you level up and you create some higher thing, but when shit hits the fan, that they still sort of stood the test of time throughout that. And I was looking at lines in the book that sort of stood out to summarize my experience of reading it. And the one that stood out to me was we outsource the problem of sanity. I just think it's kind of beautifully said. And it speaks to me to this idea of like, you can think you're so sane, but then you get hit in the face with chaos, and suddenly chaos is in control of your sanity. But then I was looking through my notes in the first book, which I've read a few times, and boom, we outsource the problem of our sanity. It's a line in the first book. And then I'm sitting here thinking, I outsource the problem of my sanity to Jordan Peterson, right? Like, we look to this man to be this New Testament in our lives, right? And he's just grappling with his own pain and kind of trying to take his thesis and apply it to his new experiences. So I don't know where that leaves us, but just a lot of thoughts there.
No, it's an interesting connection that you made between the two books, that, you know, it's that, you know, you compared your notes and actually came out with the same kind of ideas. That's interesting. So we have Dee, then Dave next.
Well, for me, not having as much background as you all, I enjoyed thoroughly going through the different aspects of the 12 chapters. And one of the things that helped me was the chapter 5, which is do not do what you hate. So as a result, I gave up a project that I had been on for a year, which was not to my liking, but I was dedicated. So, you know, I think overall, when you look at all 12 chapters, it keeps one mindful of staying on track of a good life. So being principled, being grateful, being not falling to the rhetoric that's out there, and not succumbing to greed. So, you know, I enjoyed these sessions quite immensely, and thank you, Victor, for pulling it all together, and thank you, Claire, for clarifying a lot of these, and everyone else who also participated in, you know, clarified the chapters for me.
Thank you, Dee. And actually, we were just discussing the idea of like, what, you know, how has this changed your life? So that was a really, really good example of how, you know, that the book has actually, you know, led to a certain action in your own personal life. And everybody appreciates your contributions as well. And so, so we have Dave, then Jade.
I guess
There you go.
I guess it helps if I unmuted, huh? Thanks for refereeing, Joe. I hate to be cynical because I think I really like Jordan Peterson, but I think I'll echo what some other people have said, you know, like Claire, that, you know, we really enjoyed the 12 rules of life, and I think we had the impression we were going to jump up to another level. And although I think there were some good things in it, but like the keeping romance in a relationship, I mean, that's gone over so many times. And the last chapter about being grateful, to me, we know his wife had been seriously ill for about a year, and then he had serious problems. And so to me, I don't think it was very good circumstances. And I hate to speculate, but a lot of times a publisher will push you. You know, if you had a successful book, okay, now I want another book. And, or I hate to think if he, you know, after all he'd been through, if he had financial problems, that he needed an advance for a book to pay some bills, which to me is terrible, thinking about such things. But as I think some of us have said, it's in ways it seemed a bit superficial. And he's perfect, he's capable of doing deeper stuff. Maps of meaning is, to me, it's weighted most of the way through it. But I mean, he can do very deep stuff. So I was hoping for something kind of in the middle there. But as I echoed before we got started, I'm really looking forward to the series on Christianity. I'm not sure how we're going to set it up, but I've listened to some of those in the past Saturdays with Roger. And I think there he's really at his best doing deep things and thinking great thoughts. But I enjoy all of you investigating, all of us doing it together. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. And thank you, Joe, for quarterbacking here. Next up is going to be Jade, followed by Paul. Jade.
So, and I just kind of lost track while listening to what I was really going to say. And I'm kind of debating whether or not to disclose that I didn't read the book as thoroughly as you might think.
Jade, we cannot hear you properly.
I just updated my app, so I'm not sure. Come back to me then.
It's much better now. It's much better now. Go ahead.
Okay. I don't know. I just told everybody I didn't read the book as thoroughly as people thought I might have. So I don't feel like I could say 100% about the book specifically. But what I can say is that it's interesting to bounce other people's ideas off of yours. And I think in another meetup, we were talking about externalized metacognition. And I think it's interesting to learn how the people you go around the world with consider the world. And I think that's one of my biggest takeaways, is to see people's takes on Jordan Peterson's take of the world, to see Jordan Peterson's take of the world, to see someone bringing what would be considered old school values back, which is making abstract concepts a bit more concrete. That doesn't happen. We tend to take things further and further and further away from reality. So I appreciated that also, even when I didn't necessarily embrace specifically what he was talking about. But I think overall, Jordan Peterson's book is good for stimulating thought. So that's my takeaway. That's it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jade. Next up is going to be Paul. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to, I already spoke once, Shrikant, so I'll be brief, but I want to put a respectful counter in to Dave, because I understand his point of view, but I know when people talk about mindfulness, for instance, there's this phrase that just because something is simple doesn't mean it's easy. So, and when I talked earlier about Jordan Peterson's courage to not try to be some deep, to try to not, he brought to the table, in my opinion, a more positive spin than his publisher pushed him to write a book. He brought to the table what he believes is most critical to put out as a rule. And he didn't care if everyone else was saying it or they weren't saying it. That's kind of what I mean by courageous. So yeah, it might come across as a cliche, but in 30 years, people might be saying something else, but he'll still think that's the most important thing. He was immune rather than sucked into an ideology by his own rules, a fad, anything. He spoke sincerely. And just because it doesn't come across as deep doesn't mean it's wrong. That's my thought.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. All right. Anybody else? Okay. So what we're going to do is we are going to go into the breakout rooms. Pegor, can you go ahead and put in the questions? Okay. The first question is, has the book helped you go beyond order? This book, as opposed to the first one, was about chaos. Has it given you ideas about how to deal with chaos better? The second question, what one aspect of the book, what one aspect from the book would you take with you forward? What remains? Like 2 years from now, what will remain for you? Third question, has the book precipitated any changes in your habitual thinking? What changes has it already done for you? So those are the questions for the breakout rooms. We're going to run the breakout rooms for 20 minutes, and then we get to come back with the biggest question that you have about the book. It can be a question about the book itself. It can be a question about any aspect of the book. So anything in the book is fair game, just the biggest question that you have. Then we will collect all the questions and we will do a lightning round. Starting the breakout rooms now. And again, thank you very much, Joe, for filling in. Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. All right. So now it's time for big questions. So questions, it can be covering the entire book. It could be anything. The most important question that's on your mind. It could be any aspect of the book, anything that's the biggest question on your mind. And Pegor, can you be the scribe? Give me just a second. Pegor, are you there?
Yeah, I already think so.
Okay. So what we'll do is that people will ask questions, then I will repeat them in as concise a manner as possible, and you just write it down. So we'll have a record of questions, then we'll organize all the questions, and then we will go for lightning round of answers. So folks, questions, go ahead and put exclamation mark if you'd like to put a question on the table that you want answers from everybody on. Kevin, what's your question?
My question comes with two. One is a simple one. What is order? Is order chaos coexist? That's the first. Second one is who are the audience for Beyond Order? It's for global. It's for everybody in the Earth, or just for the developed country, or
Okay. So the first question is, can order and chaos coexist?
Yeah.
Second question is, who is the audience for this book? Next up is Jean, followed by Joe. Jean.
Yeah, throughout discussion, I think I have this question. So do you see Jordan Peterson as a confusion compared to Carl Jung's more like a Daoism guy?
Okay, wonderful. That's a great question. When you compare Jordan Peterson to Carl Jung, is it the same comparison as Confucius to Lao Tzu? Okay. All right. Next up is going to be Joe. Joe, what's your question?
I don't know if you're going to shoot this down because you want to hold a meetup on it, but
Go ahead.
What was your most important? What was the rule did you like the most? I mean, and why?
We will do a whole meetup.
Okay. All right, then I'm going to leave
because
that.
What I want is that I don't want the answers in form of 1, 2, 3. I want 3 because this. Okay. But we can do a preview of that. Okay. Just we'll ask the question, what's your favorite rule? And you get to type in just one number. Not right now, but at that time. Okay.
Okay.
Let's do that. And then we'll do a full version of it later on. So Pegor, you can go ahead and keep putting the questions in the chat if you want. All right. Are there only 3 questions? Anybody have people run out of questions? Okay, Maritza, what's your question?
So this came up in our discussion. How do we reconcile receiving advice from someone who's so far skewed into chaos if we're seeking balance?
Wonderful. So how do you handle getting advice from somebody who is so far skewed into chaos about how to remain in order? Laura, what's your question? Folks, go ahead and line up for questions. Just type exclamation mark to put your question on the table. Laura, you need to unmute.
Yeah, I guess my question was more like, is he a prophet or a guy, like the guy next door?
Okay, is Jordan Peterson a prophet or a guy next door? Next, anybody, any more questions? Okay, then we will ask, we'll just run through these questions and things will come out of this. Okay. Okay, so these are the questions. Let's see which one shall we take? So there is a question about Jordan Peterson. There are two questions about Jordan Peterson. Actually, three questions about Jordan Peterson. One is, so let's talk about Jordan Peterson first. That is Jordan Peterson more Confucian or more like Lao Tzu? When you compare Jordan Peterson to Carl Jung, is that the same relationship as Confucius to Lao Tzu? So that's first question. The second question, just a second. There is some background noise. The second question about him is that, is he a prophet or guy next door? And how do you reconcile receiving advice from someone who is deep in chaos regarding order? Okay, so let's take all these three questions. So it's about Jordan Peterson. So questions are all about Jordan Peterson. How do you characterize him? Who is he? Is he a prophet or a guy next door? Is he more Confucian or, oh, wait a minute. Pegor, you have a question. Go ahead.
No, I have an answer.
Oh, you have an answer. Okay, okay. All right, folks, it's time for answers. So go ahead and type exclamation mark if you have answers. Yes, who is Jordan Peterson, Pegor?
I don't think he's neither a prophet nor the guy next door, because a prophet sort of makes predictions of the future, and he's not doing that. He's not the guy next door because he's sort of like you know how like we send people into the jungle to look at the animals and like write their behavior? He's that, but for us. But he's doing it with a mirror, and so that's who he is.
Wonderful. That's wonderfully put. So folks, the question is, who is Jordan Peterson? Whatever you want to say about that with reference to either these questions or anything that you want to say. Claire, who is Jordan Peterson?
I think Abraham might have been before me.
Oh, Abraham was, okay, that's fine. Abraham followed by Claire, Maritza, Victor, John, and Joe. Abraham.
May I go first or Claire first? Yeah, I don't. It's
okay. Go ahead. Go ahead. This is like two people waiting to go in the door, each being extremely courteous and nobody going through. Go ahead, Abraham.
Thank you. I'm not that courteous, but the Lao Tzu and Confucius, I see them as more of physicists. They are not theists. They are not they don't talk about God and spiritual world. They are talking in a logical manner, in a different way, like artists in a way. Jordan Peterson, lately he confessed that he believed in something bigger than himself and humans even. Yeah, so in that regard, it distinguishes himself from to Asian, I would say, philosophers or teachers. Another thing is Jordan Peterson, as we know, was influenced by Nietzsche a lot. So one of Nietzsche's books is Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I highly recommend. And also in World War I, German soldiers kept that book in their pocket, like a Bible. Anyhow, so in that book, Thus Zarathustra, he tried to reach out to people and say something more essential, let's say, but people does not listen, hate him, like we did to Jesus Christ, let's say. So in that regard, Jordan Peterson he's carrying some of his cross, biblical, I mean, Christian way. Yeah. That's my sense of his understanding. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to elaborate on one thing, the question, to kind of clarify the question that Jean asks. When she's saying, Confucian versus Taoist, what she's trying to refer to is that the Taoist approach is to work with nature of things and nature of people and kind of do like this bottom up grasp of what you want, what you want the society to be. Whereas Confucian is kind of a top down of kind of in order, it's kind of primary focus on the order in the society, whereas the Taoist approach or Lao Tzu approach is about kind of going bottom up of saying, what's the nature of people, and do as little as possible so that the nature of people can express themselves. So that's the distinction that's what we've been discussing when we are studying Tao Te Ching. So that's what is being referred to. All right. So Claire, who is Jordan Peterson?
Yeah, I think in line with what you're saying, I think what these books attempt to do is unite his very deep understanding of a lot of different genres with what the people are feeling, and this sort of lived experience and work bottom up in that way. And that's what this book does well, although it might be a little unsatisfying for us. The other parallel I see here, kind of from a Western perspective, is Socrates and his followers. That if maybe we think of Jung as the Socratic, like putting out the ideas, putting out the questions, Peterson is kind of a Plato figure, cementing it, picking that up and cementing it in something more reasonable or tangible or answers. And then I think what we feel now is this guy is flawed, and this kind of guy next door character of, you do start to get a sense, and even of his interviews now, of repetition and maybe some lost sharpness that we really wanted to see in him. He's just sort of repeating the same things. We see this in Meetup. People come, and they come after 15 times, and you just end up saying the same things if that's all you're based in. And I think what that encouraged us now to do is like, we now are the next Lao Tzu. We are the lived embodiment of whatever these ideas are, and we have to be that level up that I think we were really requiring of him.
Wonderful. Beautifully put, Claire. Next up is going to be Maritza, Victor, John, Joe, and Kevin. Maritza, who is Jordan Peterson?
I think Jordan Peterson is just a man. He's just like the rest of us. He gets out of bed the same way. He just happens to be somebody with strong opinions, strong convictions, strong beliefs. And he's fortunate enough to have a platform where people will listen and hear many of his opinions, beliefs, and convictions. I would imagine that Aristotle in his time was viewed as just a man, and he walked among his contemporaries, and he had the fortune to have a platform where people listened to him. Would I put Peterson on that level? I would not. However, maybe in 500 years, somebody will. That's near impossible to say. I do find this book, more than any of his others, shows to me a slightly more rigidity in some of his beliefs than I had seen previously. But again, he's human, so that's okay. And there's still value to be found in somebody who takes the time and the energy to present their ideas or concepts in a manner that's easily digestible. Well, maybe that's the wrong thing, not easily digestible, but in a format as such that can be studied, as it were. I think that alone makes him worth reading, even if one does not entirely agree with his background or his beliefs.
Wonderful. I want to elaborate on one aspect of it, of that he makes ideas accessible. And I'm going to connect it to Carl Jung. I think Carl Jung is a much deeper thinker. He is able to kind of, the ground that he broke and what the knowledge was before him and after him about the self, about individuation, about the relationship between unconscious and conscious. He took a giant leap. I mean, in terms of the creativity of that, I think there is no comparison. Jung is at a much higher level. But in terms of communicating those ideas and relating those ideas to anybody who wants to grasp them, I think Jordan Peterson is head and shoulders over Jung. You have to really struggle to get Jung. For most people have to struggle to get Jung. And the other thing is that Jordan Peterson is broader than Jung. Jung is incredibly broad, but Jordan Peterson is even broader. He brings in like biology, he brings in mythology, he brings in history, and he brings all of that together. So those are the two things. But this is not the point about that distinction that Jean was making. But in terms of, I would say Jung is deeper and Jordan Peterson is far more accessible and far more integratable. He will actually connect it to your life much better. So those are the distinctions I see between Jung and Jordan Peterson. Victor, who is Jordan Peterson?
Well, so Stefan was asking, define guy next door. So I'd say a guy next door is someone who knows a thing or two about you and your own behaviors. So to define a prophet is someone who can see into the future. So in that regard, I'd say Jordan Peterson is like a guy next door who has the qualities of a prophet. So not just looking into any objective future, but our own future. These are the things to come in your own life, so be prepared for that. So in that regard, I'd say he's both.
Wonderful. I like this observation about, saying that he's a man. I mean, I think that's really crucial. And I mean, I have a very odd kind of thing. Like if I learn something from anybody, I'm just enormously grateful because I know how hard it is to actually genuinely learn something and how hard it is to communicate to another human being. And I've certainly learned many things from Jordan Peterson, and I'm just enormously grateful for that. So that's one thing. And that's just how I look at people. It's so rare to actually learn something really deep from somebody, and he's succeeded in doing that for me. So I'm enormously grateful. The second thing is that I give people a lot of leeway. We are all human beings, and there are going to be all kinds of issues, and to kind of spit at people because they are human, I don't think is right. I don't think it is just. So so that's just my take about kind of the humanness. John, who is Jordan Peterson?
Well, I kind of think there's more choices than prophet or neighbor next door. So I was sort of trying to fit to these two archetypes. And the first thing that came to mind with the guy next door is Ernest. That guy that did the TV commercials, hey Vern. That doesn't strike me as Jordan Peterson. A guy next door could be, other people too. But that didn't fit for me. And then a prophet, that's closer, but there's also something about a prophet that is sort of like, there's a bit of madness in a prophet. Like there's sort of a little bit of tapped into, you're sort of like a channel. And I actually don't really see Peterson as that. Like somebody like Jung is that. Like he sort of, he wrote the Red Book. He sort of went a little crazy. He meditates. Jesus Christ was a prophet. Muhammad. These are people who tapped into something and then channeled it. Peterson, to me, is more of like a shepherd because he is, or a guide. He's not necessarily channeling or sharing the channel. He's pointing the direction to where and saying, hey, go over there and channel. And you don't want to go over that hill because that hill's bad. And And so I think he sees his readers as a little bit of like a flock, much in the way a preacher does. So that's, to me, I think how he is, his books seem to be geared towards people who he thinks are a little lost in modern society. I think that's his audience when he has in mind, people who don't necessarily have, for whatever reason, the cultural girders and the connection to spirituality. And he's not really saying, okay, I'm channeling God or whatever. He's saying, this is how you can do it. And here's some examples of stories of people who've done it. So.
John, fantastic observation. So firstly, I like your saying that we're just talking about two archetypes. Let's broaden the discussion. You know, what archetypes fits Jordan Peterson better? Because clearly, like prophet, I think Jung qualifies as a prophet, seeing something. It's not that in case of, and Guy Next Door is just doesn't capture many things about him either. And I like the term. I mean, I think one of the points that you brought up, which is huge, is that what he's doing is that he's actually talking to the modern audience effectively. So in a sense, he's a just brilliant communicator. So that's one aspect of him. The second thing is that he's bringing, what is he communicating? What is he communicating? He's communicating like this age-old wisdom, like the accumulated wisdom of the civilization, whether it is the myths, whether it is, you know, the value of institutions, and he's communicating that to a modern audience, which is kind of lost. So I think that, you know, your characterization as Shepherd is wonderful. Thank you, John. Joe, who is Jordan Peterson?
It's interesting. It's hard to say, to pass judgment without really knowing him. So I'll just say that. But from what he has written, I think he is a ethical intellect, and in the sense that he has a very strong value system. And I think as people were mentioning in the chat earlier, you can see a lot of Stoic principles in his work. I truly believe that. I think he's an intellect in that how he's able to comprehend, as you said, such a wide range of topics and kind of put them into a coherent narrative. I mean, for everybody to consume. You know, I had known very little up until the past year about, you know, Jordan Peterson or meetups. Definitely not in depth as much as everyone else here. But what I have learned about him is that he's extremely passionate too. And not only passionate, but he's also a very capable psychologist. If you read the book, if you read into how he approaches his patients and how he communicates that message, and he approaches them in everyone in a very unique way, whether using, you know, conventional techniques or something like hypnosis or all these different techniques in order, and you feel like where his patients make breakthroughs, you really feel that in his writing. So I think he's a very passionate psychologist on this in general. But I don't necessarily see him as dogma. I mean, he challenges dogma. I don't see him as dogmatic at all. I see him as saying, challenge your map of the world. That is the fundamental basis of who he is. This is why conservatives are important. This is why liberals are important. And you guys need each other to challenge your thoughts and to change your map of the world. And I see that as being extremely open and flexible. I think he has his personal belief system, but I think his work speaks to challenging your own personal beliefs. So I see him as somebody that's very open, very ethical, and very passionate, and extremely capable at communicating his message to the masses, which is rare.
Wonderful. Thank you. I mean, two things that really stand out for me is kind of the passion. He's very serious. He thinks ideas matter and all of this matters. Your life is important and you need to leverage all of knowledge and all of your understanding in order to guide your life well. So, and he feels very, very passionately about that. So that's one thing. The second thing that you were saying is, I think of it as independence. Like he's independent. So it's like the combination of his ideas are actually a very odd combination of things. So it's not like completely conservative. It's completely liberal. It's not like a monolithic kind of ideas. It is kind of drawn from multiple sources, but in a very independent way put together. So there is that. And I think that character of honesty comes through, of actually saying, okay, what is it that I actually think? What is it that this other person is actually saying? Let me try to figure it out in that dialogue of just engaging people in that. So I think that is also another thing that comes up. Thank you. Kevin, who is Jordan Peterson?
Yes, thank you. Jordan Peterson is one Western professor working in Toronto University. He's a unique professor. He has different voice in university. That's really to say that. Then also, I'm very interested in his clinical experience as a psychologist, a great communicator. Hardly normally professor can have trouble talk to a normal audience. He can go to TV show, go to normal, ordinary people, connect with them. Yeah, it's kind of next door of guys. That's your neighbor. How is to, and I consider his work like social examination, and if a simple word, it's a good facilitator. Connect to what we think about, currently connect to the future and past. And yeah, and he's done a great work on analyze system, beliefs, or meanings, real example. And frankly, I would say he use those example people don't want to show on the paper because consideration ambiguous argument, but he did it. He's man. I like him.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kevin. Next up is going to be Dave, followed by Becky, Brian, and Stefan. Dave, go ahead.
Okay, I didn't realize. Okay. To me, the thing about Jordan Peterson is very well read, the intellectual. And when I was wading through Maps of Meaning, to me, it almost seemed like he read a book for every paragraph he'd written. And also I'd mention, as someone who grew up in the Cold War, that his stress on Russian writers, Dostoevsky and Nietzsche, just extolling them, saying about how great their thinking was, is really amazing to me. And the other thing I'd mention is his starting with mythology, the Mesopotamian myths and going back to Egyptian myths. Reminds me a parallel I draw is Joseph Campbell, but I really enjoy exploring his stuff. Just this book was not my favorite. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Next up is going to be Becky, followed by Brian. Becky.
I think that Jordan Peterson is more of a top-down thinker rather than a bottom-up, often because he does start with that general idea. And if you look at someone who starts bottom up, you have all the individual units, and then you're building up towards something. And where there are edge cases, you tend to see something that will emerge of, well, here's a rule for this when this happens. Here's another tiny rule for this. And then you end up with like 50 different, very distinct rules. And you don't see that throughout here. It's more of, here's a general rule. And from here, make it, everything comes down, and it's flexible enough and dynamic enough that, and nuanced enough that everything else you can fill in with your own details. And for him, he's he's pretty logical. So so you see the details flow through, but it's still he still leaves room for you to put your own values, though his own values are quite clear through his writing. And still, like, more evidence of him being more of a top-down thinker is that he's often critical about the endless possibilities. And so he'll talk about that. It's like, there are endless, infinite possibilities, and many of them are terrible. It's like, and only a few of them are feasible. And if you even look at just the rules, he says, aim at one thing. That's very top down. And it's like, it's all about like cutting through. You're not building up from the fog to figure out what may be on top. It's straight down. That's my analysis of Peterson.
Wonderful. Thank you, Becky. I think that if you look at several of his ideas, like order and chaos, right? They're very simple ideas. And that can spur that you can apply to so many different things. Or his idea of maps of meaning, that this is where you currently are, this is where you're going to go, and this is how you're going to go. Now that's a very simple, general idea. And no matter where you are, no matter where you want to go, and no matter how you think you need to get there, you can use that framework. And he thinks about those, at that level. So that makes it kind of both kind of unified, at the same time applicable in so many different contexts and so many different scales. You can look at order and chaos in a very narrow scale of a conversation, or you can look at society as a whole or something like that. So it's absolutely, he kind of has ideas like that. Those are universal on one side, but applicable at all scales in all contexts. So thank you. Next up is Brian, followed by Stefan. Brian or Penny or both?
So my impression of him is it's really, Dave said it after I had already chimed in, but I would add, I guess I'd put it a little differently, in that he's a unique combination of all of these different inputs he has had. And the inputs are really, for him, are very unique. The Russian writers, literature, the political science, 21st from the 20th century, philosophy, mythology. Joseph Campbell, I've spent a lot of time with. I think that, and when I look at Joseph Campbell, I think, wow, Jordan Peterson is really getting his ideas from him. And then I look at Dostoevsky, and wow, Jordan Peterson's really getting his ideas from him. And Carl Jung, wow, he's really getting his ideas from Jung. So Jordan Peterson himself said that he's taken all these, compared these ideas for consistency, for usefulness, and then thrown away the things that don't work. But I don't think he's even given himself enough credit, because I think it's a synthesis. It's his own very user-friendly synthesis in his attempt to help people live their lives. And so, as others have said, he has his limitations, but I do appreciate his effort, which I think is largely successful.
Wonderful, thank you. Penny, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, well, what I just say is, this is the first book of his I've read, so I'm just come in. So, but to me, he's really like a thinker and examiner, and he's looking at, like, myths, and he's looking at modern science, and he's looking at all different areas and trying to really, and his work, I think, as a psychologist and with his patients, like to say what it is to be human, why are we like this? And to kind of explain that, but, like with the historical context too, where I thought was really interesting, you know, that like the thinkers like from the past, like the Greeks and everything like that, that a lot of what they said really was spot on to describe what's happening with humans and how they think, and, you know, and then just trying to apply that, like they say, to then kind of say kind of like, well, look, this is kind of what a person is like. And then to be able to launch yourself into that journey, which, you know, what he basically says, life is a journey. And so here's some ways to get through the journey more successfully, to be able to orient yourself. And because the world is really complicated, very chaotic, and so that you can achieve something unique for you, but that would really be an improvement for you and for all of like mankind. Because if each person improves themselves, then everybody is going to be improved in some way.
Wonderful. I want to combine both things that Brian and Penny said. So firstly, on one hand, he kind of drinks deeply from these deep ideas. These are very deep sources, you know, Nietzsche, Dostoevsky, Jung. These are very deep sources. And he brings them to actually kind of your personal life and kind of self-improvement. How do you improve your life? So there is a tremendous practical bent to his work. At the same time, this large, you know, he kind of takes in all these large, deep theories and then somehow manages to point them towards saying, so this is how you actually use these things to make your life better. So he has both those things. Next up is going to be Stefan. Stefan.
Okay, so I hope this makes sense, but so I heard that Nietzsche thought that all philosophers are essentially people who are putting out ideas that they themselves believe as a way to, in a way, push out their, what he calls will to power out into the world. So I think Peterson is, because he's basically a modern day philosopher, he would fall into this category, but I think he's a little bit different, where he seems to me like such a tortured individual that I think he's putting out all these ideas that he himself probably needs to implement in his own life, but we just don't see all the nuances of what's going on in his day-to-day. So we really don't know, but this is my suspicion.
Thank you, Stefan. What I want to ask now is, you know, the next questions are about order and chaos, but I want to ask a more general question, because several of us have talked about how Jordan Peterson integrates things. So the question I have is, what do you think are the core ideas of Jordan Peterson? When you look at all of Jordan Peterson's ideas, Becky was talking about, you know, it's top down. It is, you know, many people talked about the integration, you know, it's like he's put it together. So what are kind of, if you wanted to name few ideas, like one or two or three ideas of Jordan Peterson, which you think are central to how he approaches everything, what would those be? Abram.
When I see him, he has very warm-hearted, wise man. Yeah. So he wants us, wherever we are in life, or he wants us to live. I mean, just breathing and eating and simple thing. It doesn't have to be fancy. Just don't give up. I mean, and also he doesn't want us to fall into too long, temporarily, it's possible, the so-called depression or pessimism. Yeah. Yeah, so that's what I see him. He has his own issue, but nonetheless, he does his best, like someone who plant an apple tree. Put it, yeah, that's how I see him. Yeah.
Thank you, Abram. Next up is Joe, Ray, and Pegor. Joe.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I was just thinking, but you know, the thing that I see central to Peterson and his writing is ethics. I mean, that's just to me. I can't, anything I read of his, he comes back to certain ethical principles. You know, whether it be sins of omission, you know, sins of commission, lying, telling the truth, you know, all of these ideas that are you know, central to I see just a lot of Stoic principles. I hope I'm not getting narrow-sighted because I do study Stoicism quite a bit, but I see a lot of his Stoic principles in his work, and so that's what I think is central. I could bet you I can come up with a couple more of key themes as well, if you give me a minute, but I definitely see
you can go ahead and type exclamation
all
mark.
right, thanks. Yeah, because I definitely wasn't ready, but I definitely see ethics is the first one that comes to mind that I see, and that is absolute in his writing.
Thank you. Ray, what are the core ideas of Jordan Peterson?
I'll be brief and concise, Shrikant. I feel it's about taking responsibility for your life, treating yourself as someone you were responsible for.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Pegor. Pegor.
Yeah, so I have a couple of ones. The first one is that the world is made of order and chaos, and you need to strike a balance between those. The second is that the default state of the world is suffering with a bit of like malevolence thrown in, and this is more of like a meta idea. Is the way he works, I think, is he uses like as many approaches as he can to validate whether something is true or not.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was great. Next up is Dave. Dave, what are the core ideas of Jordan Peterson?
Well, this is my favorite rule for Joe, and Ray beat me to it. But if you have a friend that called you, I need help, can you do something for me? You drop everything and go do something for them. And Jordan Peterson tells us, now look in the mirror and do that for yourself. And we think, oh, well, I'm not important. Why would I take care of myself? Why would I take my medication? So to me, that's one of the most important things he tells us. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Taking responsibility for your own life. Wonderful. Next up is Pegor. Pegor.
Yeah, forgot one more thing is the idea of, which is more in the context of Christianity, of logos, truthful speech creates good, brings forth good or whatever.
Wonderful. So I'm going to keep track of this, and then we will come back to all of this. This is really fascinating. Responsibility, ethics. Next up is Stefan. Stefan, what are the key ideas? What are the core ideas of Jordan Peterson?
One thing that I think hasn't been mentioned is his whole order chaos thing is super central to everything he talks about.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, we've been talking about the Tao Te Ching and some of the other nights, which I've actually been into lately, just even on my own interest. Mm-hmm. But I find that his whole order chaos thing is, I don't know if this is like super obvious, but like it's very Taoist. It's just slightly rebranded for a new generation, but I find it's very similar. Like it's the same thing, but you know, Taoism could be applied to like so many different things, and he's just found another way to apply it to life.
Excellent. And the concept that is really that he uses to work out this dance between order and chaos is his concept of meaning. Meaning as being something where you are operating at the edge of order and chaos, where there is growth taking place with enough stability built in, where you are kind of going forward. So I think meaning is a crucial way in which he looks at order and chaos. Next up is Brian. Brian.
I want to comment on the treat yourself as someone you're responsible for. I also agree with that. That is a key message from him. I don't think that's his only message. I think that let me say this a little bit at a time, the treating others as someone you are responsible for is also a part of his message. And I think treating yourself as someone you're responsible for is just the beginning. And then beyond that, the realization that you treat yourself best when you help take care of others as needed. And this is captured a bit in his Rule 4. I didn't think he explained it. I didn't think he really hit the nail on the head there, but notice that opportunity lurks where responsibility has been abdicated. That's just not you abdicating your own responsibility, that's others. And so it's the responsibility is the converse or complements the needs of others. And opportunity arises out of the needs of others. And I really think that I think it's important to embrace that, to really become, as Jung would say, a whole person, a complete person. I think that is an essential part of Jordan Peterson's message.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. I think that's like, there are people who kind of focus only on the individual, and he kind of naturally looks at individual and society in kind of, and in a integrated fashion. And that's a huge point. Thank you. Next up is going to be John, followed by Paul. John, what are the core ideas of Jordan Peterson?
Yeah, so I was trying to tie together, because he has this metaphysical construct, disorder and chaos, which is very simple, but it sort of permeates his work. And then it bubbles up to his life advice. And I was trying to sort of boil it down to a few sentences, and I'll give it a shot. So basically his, order and chaos are, in his view, the fundamental forces through which human beings understand the world, right? Everything we do is broken into order and chaos. And we create order out of chaos through meaning, which is why he recommends that we are driven towards meaning rather than happiness, because meaning is how we create order out of what is a sea of chaos and how we survive. And we create meaning out of the chaos most powerfully with the stories we tell. That is how we create and preserve meaning and pass it down through generations. It's the most effective tool we have. And the meaning of those stories is, the value of that meaning is in the truth of those stories. So without truth, we cannot get meaning out of these stories. Otherwise, they're just clouds. And the words we choose, right? The preciseness and the carefulness of the words we choose determines the truth and of those stories. And so the preciseness of our words is important. It's the fundamental way we think and create truth and meaning. It's their fundamental tool that human beings have to carve order, to construct order out of metaphysical chaos.
Wonderful. That was, there are the element that you brought in, which nobody had talked about, is the element of stories. And that is core to his thought and how he thinks about it. And one of the things, I mean, I think somebody has talked about logos before, but this focus on truth as being, he keeps coming back to that, tell the truth, or at least don't lie. So that's excellent. And I'm hoping to tie all of this together as you've done. I'm going to list all of these things, and then we're going to, the other thing I want to do is that it's clear that order and chaos is a foundational concept for him. And we've been looking at order and chaos in Tao Te Ching. So I want to contrast, see the similarities and differences between Lao Tzu and Jordan Peterson on order and chaos. So we'll take one more comment. So Paul, what are the core ideas of Jordan Peterson?
Thanks, Shrikant. The one thing I think I can still add that hasn't been said of all the many great things that have been said, that's an emphasis I'd like to add, is he explicates order and chaos, but then he dwells on our stance toward it. So, and the main thing about acceptance of the chaos, building on the chaos, looking for every part of your life where you're hiding from it, and we will, pulling it out and examining it. And so that acceptance and almost celebrating it and building on it, using it as something to build from, is a piece of this. So that's my thought.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, he gets that from Jung.
Yeah.
The idea of necessity of facing your shadow, of in the filth it will be found, that you have to go through this in order to get to the other side. So great, absolutely a key point. So what I want to do now is we do this kind of syntopical thing. We've been spending a lot of time on Tao Te Ching, and the idea of order and chaos, yin yang, is there. The idea of balance is there. So the question is, what is the relationship? Look at, Tao Te Ching is done 500 BC around that time. And the metaphysics of it is very clear, and it's clearly captured in those poems. So the question is, look at the idea of order and chaos in Tao Te Ching and compare it to the ideas of order and chaos in Jordan Peterson, and how is it different? Okay, so I'm going to take a stab at it, and then anybody who wants to add can add to it. Actually, let me start with Joe, and then you can go ahead and keep on typing exclamation mark, especially those who are participating in the Tao Te Ching. This is an opportunity of doing kind of this syntopical analysis, which will actually enrich both our knowledge of how Jordan Peterson looks at order and chaos and how Tao Te Ching looks at the relationship between heaven and earth. Joe, followed by Kevin. Joe.
Yeah, actually, I hit that a little early. But I was actually thinking about this a little bit today. How order and chaos and the Tao Te Ching is, are related to one another, and how these opposites of yin and yang, that actually Mike was getting to last week a little bit. He brought us to think about. But the one thing that Jordan Peterson talks about is the 1 foot in order and 1 foot in chaos, and how these two relate to one another. And when you're reading the Tao Te Ching, you see how these polar opposites of ideas are actually related to one another and flow in and out of one another. So even though they are top down and not as much bottom up, I see Jordan Peterson as kind of both. I really do. I see him as more of in a state of flow, even though he is very rigid in certain cases. But more of he talks about how to engage with both order and chaos. And I think the Tao teaches us the same thing, is how to deal with order and chaos. And so that's my initial thought. But I was seeing, I kind of always thought the idea of even classical philosophy, which is something Jordan Peterson incorporates, lightness and light and dark, and how these two can't exist without one another. One of the questions that we talked about a little bit earlier that we hadn't gotten to is that can order or chaos exist without one another? And the answer is no, in my opinion. They have to coexist. So some of these how these things coexist is very analogous to what we're talking about with the Tao. With soft and hard and things along those lines. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but I think there's some correlation there. That's
wonderful.
A little bit.
Thank you. Next up is Kevin. Kevin, what do you think?
Yes, thank you. I please use those language explain, let's see, order and chaos. Order can be spoken. It's not eternal order. Need to change, right? Then the chaos, it can be spoken. It's not eternal chaos. You need back to order stage. That's like duality. And then I just now actually, Joe, like you said, one food is all two legs, two food, one food is order, now it's chaos. You have to balance and work together, you grow together. If without chaos, where's order come from? It's like figure and ground. Without ground, where's the figure? So we too focus too much on the logo side and the mysto side. We need to consider, then bring it back. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. The way I see it, I'm looking at Lao Tzu and Jordan Peterson. Now, Lao Tzu is writing in 500 BC. What he has really well is his primary idea is that of Tao. How does nature work? And it is your relationship to Tao. And in the process, so it is kind of that is equivalent to Peterson's concept of meaning. It's like, this is what really matters, you and the Tao. How should things be? How should things be flowing? And then the axis of yin yang, I look at it as being kind of perpendicular to that. Lao Tzu gets the metaphysics perfectly, that there is order and chaos and there is a play between them. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to understand how nature works. Now, the place where Jordan Peterson adds to that is thanks to the Western corpus, and that is logos, the power of logos, okay? And one of the consequences of that is culture. Lao Tzu remains fairly close to nature, thanks to logos, because it takes logos, actually, considerable amount of logos, considerable amount of speech, considerable amount of writing to build a civilization on any scale. And West excels in that. So Jordan Peterson lays that on the top of the metaphysics that is there. He gets the metaphysics and he lays that on the top. And so he's able to talk about the culture in a far more sophisticated way and complex way. He can address the modern culture. And the middle term there is the logos. Now, Lao Tzu is very good at identifying the limits of logos. He will warn you that names are the father of 10,000 things. Names are needed to create things, but the Tao remains unnamed. So don't get hung up on whatever you have created with your words or in your action, because there is this entire process of recreation. And that's what that metaphysical aspect that he's focused on. But there is this entire thing, industrial civilization that the West kind of pioneered, which required logos. And Jordan Peterson understands that a lot more. The grasp of the metaphysics of Lao Tzu is far deeper. So for example, you don't see that much suffering. in Tao Te Ching. Lao Tzu, in that famous story of vinegar, he's the one who is laughing when he's drinking the vinegar. So the emotional aspect, there is the suffering which is there in Jordan Peterson is not there in Lao Tzu. That is, again, a big achievement of Lao Tzu. The big achievement of Jordan Peterson is logos and being able to talk about culture in far more detail, far more power than Lao Tzu. So that's my take on the comparison between the two, what is common and what is different. Stefan.
Yeah, this is just a quick little side note, but I learned today that the Greek philosopher Heraclitus was alive, I think at around the same time, maybe even the same years. There's an overlap in their lives.
Yes.
And he had ideas that were very, very similar to Lao Tzu, but he, of course, lived in Greece, and then Lao Tzu is, I believe, China.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I don't believe that the two were interconnected, but these two philosophers still had very similar ideas about opposites in the world around us, having this dance around each other, and that's the way all of life works.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually a very interesting age, because at the same time in India, there was Buddha and Jain, and so there's like lots of things around like 500 BC plus or minus 200 years. There's a lot of interesting things happened at many, many different places. So it's like Lao Tzu and Confucius in China. And then you have all the Greek philosophers here, Plato, Aristotle, all of those folks, Heraclitus, all of them in the West. And then you've got like Buddha and Mahavir Jain and stuff like that in India. Lots of like a lot of the Yoga Sutras are written at that time. So it's just at that age, all of this happened together. All right, folks. So this was excellent. And what we are going to do next, the next big series we are launching into is Bible. And I'm trying to figure out how to do it in the deepest possible way. Something that, we have this amazing community that is able to, that we've got so many such large base of common knowledge that we should be able to tackle this at a completely different level than it has been done before. And, I'm talking to Roger, and we will figure out some way of doing that. My basic idea is follow what Jordan Peterson is doing, of focusing on the psychological meaning of Bible. So we're not going to focus on trying to take in all the text. We're going to focus on psychological meaning of key concepts of Bible. And we're going to see how far we can, go in that. So that series, I've still not decided whether the next meetup, we're going to start Bible at the next meetup or the meetup after that. I will decide that tomorrow. If I don't start with Bible next time, the meetup is going to be your favorite rule from Beyond Order. In any case, I'm going to do that meetup at some point. We will go ahead and say, what our favorite rule is and why. And I will broaden it a little bit. So if people want to bring in a rule from 12 rules, they are welcome to do that. And so that's what is coming up. I want to tell you that there is a really fascinating, couple of 3 meetups I want to talk about on Friday. That is tomorrow. I'm going to be doing a meetup on the ideas of Martin Buber. It is about I-thou relationship, which is based on a kind of deep relationship between two human beings or between you and nature. So it's the same idea of the Tao and your relationship to Tao, as opposed to your me-it relationship or I-it relationship, where it's kind of a more utilitarian relationship to concrete things, as opposed to kind of the core of beings themselves. It's kind of existential versus kind of metaphysical versus man-made. Buber has very deep things, and I have a video like 10-minute. There is a 10-minute great summary of Buber's ideas, and the book itself is actually quite hard to read in some ways, but in some ways very easy. It depends. I don't know how people will see it. It's a very short book. You don't have to read it. It's a very simple concept, and we're going to be discussing that. So that's on Friday. On Sunday, I have a truly incredible meetup based on Walter Ong's idea. One of his core collaborators, Tom Zlatic, is going to be here, and he's going to be talking about the nature of language, this dance between spoken language and written language, and what it does in the mind, and how do you use both of these effectively, the writing and speaking, and how they are required for each other to keep them alive. So it's kind of like order and chaos. Writing is kind of more ordered, whereas a more ordered part, whereas it's the flow of speaking that rejuvenates, brings in things, and makes the writing better. And what writing does is that it gives far more concreteness and definiteness and power, transmitting power to what is spoken. So how do you work out this dance? And then we're going to look at how does the consciousness work under all these conditions, when you're writing, when you're reading, when you're watching TV, when you're using a computer, hopefully when you're doing Zoom, what is going on. I really want to figure out what goes on in these meetups. I've been doing these meetups all these hours. What exactly happens, and why is it that it works so well? It's like we read a lot, we write a lot, each of us, and we talk, and all of that, there is a connection between the fact that we read a lot, so the way we talk is different, the fact that we write and keep notes, that also shapes our conversation. So how does all of this work at a very deep level, and how did it come to be, and what is its future in the computer age? So that's what Tom and I will be talking about, and there will be a general discussion. So that's at 2:30 on Sunday. And on Saturday at 12 o'clock, we're starting a new series with Brian McQuay on applying Julian Jaynes' ideas to personal growth. This is Brian's own work. He's written a whole book on it, and we'll be just going through the book of saying, how do you use your what is called conscious interiority, of kind of seeing kind of the simulation of yourself and your future self? How do you use that as a tool for reshaping your life? So that's what is coming up. So folks, hope to see you then. Good night, everybody. Bye.